Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH2503, and this is the 24th, the final lecture summary for, what's the module name? Community Media Production. There we go. You thought I'd forgotten for a second. We're getting to this point. It's the last week of term. Still got lots of work to do though. We've got reports to write. And other things to do. So what I want to cover in this, like last week, I used introduced the topic that we're going to be focusing on in the final year, which is about evaluation practice. This week I'm going to introduce the intercultural communication ideas about how we can understand and work with different communities and what we maybe need to take into account to be able to understand how those communities operate. What I want to try and do in between now and our return in October is to build up some case studies and some case studies that I've experienced through my travels, but also if we can share and note case studies that we can maybe share on DMU Talk, so that we've got an idea of kind of, you know, our personal experience, and our blogs and videos and our reflections about these things can be shared amongst us. So a kind of like a summer project for you, should you wish to help and support our learning in your final year, is to, as you're out and about, going on holiday, whatever it is, just record some video or podcasts or wherever it is, take lots of photos and gather as much as you can about the different cultures. Now, remember, you don't have to travel far from Leicester. You can be in Leicester, and the person sat next to you on the bus or in the cafe is from more than likely from a different culture. We can find out what's going on and how we assimilate and understand each other by talking to each other. And we don't necessarily have to travel, but if we do travel, then we want to maybe try and capture that. So what are we going to cover? So I'm going to start off with the idea of one of the things that it's kind of, people from different cultures have been demonized in Europe, across Europe, for a number of years now, and often that is on the basis of a kind of a misidentification or a fear, or whatever that might be, legitimate fear, but still it's a fear of other cultures, the other, people who don't share the same social and cultural values as. And I use this in inverse. This is, I understand how this statement is made, as our culture. What does that mean? So let's think about the idea of what intercultural communication is and how we can develop a sense of understanding about the processes and meanings that are being exchanged through intercultural communication, and the need for this as we become an ever more globalized world, and we experience, and we can't take each other for granted. We can't assume that everybody thinks the same way that we do. Is that we have to look to cultural, social, cognitive, physical diversity in order to be able to help and support the process of establishing common ground, so that we can get on and we can tolerate each other and we can work with each other, and that we don't resort to conflict, but that we actually, we enhance our relationships with each other. So there's a process that is at play in this kind of relationships and engagement, and it's a communication process. And we think about we talk about this in terms of the traditional method of thinking about communication as a kind of transmission model, a kind of encoding and decoding. And in actual fact, we might be better to think about this as a kind of negotiation. So the kind of what is the symbolic interactionist tradition is a useful way to think about meaning generation and communication as a gesture which implies or seeks to achieve an accomplishment, which seeks to achieve something, but it's a negotiation. You don't just communicate by yourself, you communicate in relation to others and others around you. And the challenge is to, when you're talking to somebody and you get a blank face and you don't know what they say, you can't accept, or they can't accept what you're saying. There's a kind of the shutters come down, the dead eye comes out. That's the breakdown of intercultural communication, when people are nodding and people are able to say yes, kind of add to something, or at least agree to disagree. There's some level of mutual understanding there. So we'll think about this in terms of, there are, as we become, international travel has become so much more prevalent in the last 10 years, but it's driven a kind of sense of intercultural anxiety, and how we define ourselves in relation to our expectations of engaging with people from different cultures, and this is fueled by social media. It's great. I follow people from around the world on Instagram who are doing really interesting things, and are engaging with the world in a way which I'm frankly jealous of. But is that a media perception, or is that an actual kind of, somebody's, kind of actually engagement in a social situation? So we have to be, we step back from this. The whole critical thinking that we do on through the academic process is to be critical about the notion of the differences that we see as on the differences and similarities that we see on the surface might actually, when we start to unpick them, display a whole range of different kind of complexities and distinctions that we don't understand and comprehend. As me, as a white Western guy who is, kind of put me in a different culture, and I might not be able to reorient myself. And so when people come to Western Europe, Northern Europe, we have that kind of sense of kind of disorientation, and it's a process. And but we can adapt. We are adaptable social animals. We learn from each other, and I suppose we kind of, what are our shared understandings? We don't just live in one culture. We live in multiple cultures, subcultures, layers of culture, generational culture, and there are cultures that we're familiar with and cultures that we're alien to and not familiar with. But increasingly, there's a kind of sense of hybridization of our culture. There's kind of, we're all the same under the brand of Nike or kind of Adidas or Apple or wherever it is. Again, that's kind of it really does need challenging, and I suppose, but at the same time, it's changed the nature of how we think about our identity, because sportswear seems to be the universal language of youth fashion these days, wherever you go in the world. So there's a kind of hybridization and a shift and change in the frameworks that we use to think about and anticipate culture and what its role is. And especially as we kind of, a networked and social mediated kind of world is something which means that we have to rethink and adapt our associations. So what are we culturally associated with? So whilst we might think of intercultural communication as being something which is extrinsic, out there, we have to deal with other people. Actually, it can be quite an intrinsic or an inward-looking view of culture, because culture changes, and how do we adapt to those changes and sort out those things which we regard as valuable from those which are not valuable. So this is, kind of an indication of how we'll proceed in the final year. The notes for this are up and available on the DMU Commons wiki. Just go to wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk. If you want to carry on the conversation, share some of your experience, go to talk at the DMU Talk, which is at talk.our.dmu.ac.uk. Okay, I'll see you at the lecture.